Hey, Mom.
Hey honey, how was your day today?
It was so good.
What did you learn about?
Today in social studies, we learned about poverty.
I'm so glad to know that you guys are learning about that.
I know, right? Big question. How do we define and measure poverty?
Poverty is a state in which someone is not living a minimally decent life because of a lack of central capabilities, usually due to a financial deficit. Poverty should be measured using the Supplemental Poverty Measure, SPM, because it's more precise and suited to current lifestyles and tendencies and therefore allows professionals to understand the best approach to increasing quality of life.
Wait, what's the supplemental poverty measure?
The SPM is a measure in which FCS UTI thresholds along with median spending is taken into account in order to understand the ways in which a household is meeting their threshold for pre-tax income adjusted for government benefits.
Ugh, Mom, you're so confusing. Let me ask my Snapchat AI because he gets me. So actually, Mom, a supplemental poverty measure is an alternative way of measuring poverty in the United States. It takes into account additional factors such as government assistance programs and regional cost of living variations. It provides a more nuanced understanding of poverty by considering various aspects that impact a person's economic well-being. See, Snapchat AI covers it so well.
Okay, yes, that is one way to put it. The SPM gives the government a more in-depth way to understand who is living in poverty. It's hard to define what a basic need is and how much of that basic need is required to thrive. So the SPM has two categories, resources and thresholds. Resources tell us what we have and thresholds tell us if we have enough. So the SPM defines resources as the income and benefits one has. So pre-tax income is measured and then...
Wait, what's pre-tax income?
Pre-tax income is the money someone has before the government takes some of that money away to spend on the country. So then this pre-tax income is added to all the benefits that the government gives to a household.
What kind of benefits does the government give out?
SNAP and tax credits.
Oh, okay.
And then non-discretionary expenses are subtracted from this number, which are things like taxes, medical expenses, such as medicine, and more.
Okay, that makes sense. What's that letter thing that ends in TI that you were talking about?
Oh, the FCSUTI, which stands for Food, Clothing, Shelter, Utilities, and Telephone and Internet.
Wait, Mom, why did you whisper the TI?
Because telephone and internet are becoming more and more necessary to carry out basic functionings. Like, imagine doing your homework these days without Google. So it's newer, but starting to become a more necessary aspect of life in the US. So it will be used in the SPM threshold.
I get that. So is the main way that poverty is measured, is that the main way poverty is measured in the US? Because I feel like we talked about something different in class. Something about, like, food baskets?
Yes, that's the OPM. It's a...
Oh my gosh, I remember now. The OPM, or Official Poverty Measure, is one of the measures that is still used today, but has been in place for a long time, like probably even around the time you were born. People used to spend about 1/3 of their income on food, so someone made a thrifty food basket, which had the items that were considered to be necessary to sustaining life, and it was multiplied by 3. Now, people aren't spending that high of a portion of their money on food, but the cost of the thrifty basket is updated yearly for inflation and accounts for changing family sizing and composition.
Wow, you really got that down. I'm so glad that you were learning all of this in school. How about the capabilities approach? Did you learn about that in class?
No, what's that?
The capabilities approach is a way to look at poverty. It claims that it's important to achieve well-being and that the way to achieve well-being looks different for everyone. Instead of focusing on the outcome, the capabilities approach focuses on the process, what you choose to do with the resources you have to achieve what you want. These achievements, then, are called functionings. Turning a capability into a functioning is based on personal choice, which is of primary moral importance. Amartya Sen, a prominent figure in the capabilities school of thought, once said, "Economic growth without investment in human development is unsustainable and unethical." While it's largely related to income, the capabilities approach aims to focus on doings and beings rather than money.
So why did you say that the SPM is your favorite?
It's not necessarily my favorite, just the approach that I think is the most practical for measuring poverty in the U.S. It adjusts for geographical variety, such as standard of living and cost of living, which makes the data more precise.
Oh, so it's more adjusted than the OPM?
Yes, and that's the second half of my argument. I think it's a good measure because, unlike the OPM, the SPM is more suited to current lifestyles. We don't spend 1/3 of our money on food anymore, and now we also spend money on things like childcare and healthcare, and everything included in the FCS UTI. It also considers diverse living situations, which the OPM does not.
Oh, okay, so if it's so updated, then why doesn't everyone agree about using this measure?
That's a great question, sweetie. Understandably, not everyone agrees about how poverty should be defined and measured. Proponents of the capabilities approach would argue that we shouldn't just look at people's financial situations. Some people would disagree with how poverty is defined in general, like Rector.
Who's Rector?
Rector argues that when we exaggerate the living situations of people in poverty and insinuate that poverty has not gotten better over the last few decades, then it's hard to create policies that alleviate the living situations of those in poverty today. Rector has noted that the mainstream press and activist groups also frequently conflate poverty with homelessness. He asserts that effective policy can only be created when we all agree about what poverty actually looks like in our country. And that starts by understanding that, in reality, the gap between the living conditions of a homeless person and the typical poor household is proportionally as great as the gap between the poor households and a middle-class family in the suburbs.
Come to think of it, that does make sense. I feel like when I think of poverty, I only think of homelessness. But now I understand that not everyone living in poverty is homeless. Do you agree with Rector?
Yeah, Rector does make a good point about how we all need to be on the same page about poverty because inaccurate numbers may invalidate the living situations of so many. But I do think that Rector's point about some Americans not actually living in poverty because of the amenities that they have is an inaccurate depiction of a family's living situation.
I feel like capabilities approach is the best at looking at people's well-being because it defines things that make people live a fulfilled life and doesn't necessarily focus on money.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The only thing about the capabilities approach is that it can be hard to measure, and there are other outside factors which impact someone's ability to turn something from a capability to a function. First of all, it's hard to look at a group of people and determine whether or not they feel like they have a substantial freedom.
Yeah, I guess, and substantial freedom might look different depending on who the person is.
Exactly. Also, there can be outside factors which limit people from doings. For example, you know how to ride a bike, but what if there weren't any sidewalks or bike lanes in our whole town? Then you wouldn't be able to ride a bike, then you wouldn't be able to ride your bike to and from school.
That's a good point. I guess everything has its drawbacks. Like the OPM is so outdated.
You're right that everything does have its cons, but it also has its pros. One could argue that the OPM is outdated because we don't spend the same proportion of our income on food anymore, but it's still a great measure of how levels of poverty in our country have changed over time. Because it's been around for a few decades, we know that poverty levels can actually have decreased significantly.
Okay, well that's a good sign, but of course there's still a long way to go in developing measures that alleviate poverty.
Exactly, and I still think the SPM is the way to go.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting a text. I really gotta go, but thanks, Mom.
You're welcome.